Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and if you think Cartoon Network is terrible today, well let's look back at around 2009, when the channel basically gave up. This is most commonly referred to as the CN Real era, where Cartoon Network decided, you know what, nobody likes cartoons anymore, and started airing a bunch of crappy live action shows. People don't look back on this era fondly. Most of the shows were very pandering and trying way too hard to be cool, and it's just not what people wanted on Cartoon Network. People came to Cartoon Network to watch cartoons, and unfortunately there weren't many on there. Thankfully, in 2010, Cartoon Network greenlit two cartoons, both of which would help save the network. One of which being Adventure Time, and the other being Regular Show. To me, it always felt like Regular Show was in the shadows of Adventure Time. It was always popular, but people didn't really give it the attention that they gave Adventure Time, even leading to Cartoon Network basically abandoning the show, causing it to get worse ratings. But did the show deserve this treatment? Or was Cartoon Network being unfair? Well, I guess it's time to figure out in my review of Regular Show. And I don't think there's really a better time to do this, considering the fact that JG Quintel's new show, Close Enough, is gonna be coming out very soon. Also, does anyone else think that this guy looks a lot like the Taekwondo guy from the Death Punchies episode? The plot. The plot of the show is about two slackers named Mordecai and Rigby doing something normal, only for it to lead to whatever supernatural element happening, and the two have to fix it. Now, this basic premise does get expanded on later seasons, but more on that later. I do like this premise. It is basic and a little formulaic, however, they do a lot of creative things with it. It's not exactly the same thing every episode. They do something different with it each and every time to make it feel new and fresh. The characters. First up, we have Mordecai, who is a slacker but at the same time still tries to be at least somewhat responsible and tries his best to be a nice person. Mordecai is probably my favorite character since he's the one who I can relate to most, since I also have trouble balancing work with fun, despite trying my best to do so. Mordecai is just a very pleasant and nice character to be around, and when it doesn't involve romance, I always enjoy watching him. Next up, we have Rigby, who, like Mordecai, is very much a slacker, however, is quite a lot less responsible than Mordecai is. Not gonna lie, Rigby's kind of a douche. However, he still does mean well most of the time, and does try to make a better person of himself in the later seasons. Plus, he can be really funny sometimes. And next we have Benson, Mordecai and Rigby's boss, who clearly has anger problems and constantly threatens Mordecai and Rigby to fire them. What's interesting about Benson is that even though he always yells at Mordecai and Rigby, he actually doesn't hate them and at times enjoys spending time with them. This helps make Benson feel more like a complex and interesting character rather than just a one-note angry person. But man, his anger can be really freaking funny sometimes. Some of the most memorable moments of the entire show. And next up we have Skips, a wise old strong yeti who works at the park. He's also immortal and sort of acts as a mentor towards Mordecai and Rigby. The interesting thing about Skips is that he's not always in the right. In fact, sometimes he can be so painfully wrong about something, yet his ego is too big for him to understand that. Despite that, I do find Skips to be a good character, and it's always interesting getting to hear more about his past. Next up we have Pops, a weird, happy old man who actually acts more like a child. I do find Pops to be a very entertaining and fun character, and he actually does become very important to the plot later in the show. And lastly, we have Muscle Man, a green thing who works at the park and is very obnoxious, constantly telling my mom jokes, and just overall being kind of a nuisance. I find Muscle Man to be a pretty hit or miss character. He can be funny sometimes, but other times he can be a little too obnoxious for my liking. Overall, we have a pretty solid cast of characters. All of these characters get at least some form of character development later on in the series, and most of them are very enjoyable to watch. There are other characters too, like High Five Ghost, Thomas, and Margaret. However, I find those characters to be a lot less interesting to talk about since I don't really have much of an opinion on them. The tone. Regular Show is kind of weird in that the tone kind of changes as the series goes on. Thus, I can't really label the show as one solid, consistent tone, since again, it constantly changes. So instead, I'm gonna talk about all three of the different tones that this show has. Well, first up, there's the tone of the first 4 seasons. These seasons have a more casual feel to them. These episodes are a lot more episodic, and are more about seeing what kind of crazy stuff Mordecai and Rigby get into. I do find these episodes to be very fun and enjoyable, however, since they are very funny, and Mordecai and Rigby's personalities are very fun and enjoyable to watch. And pretty relatable because, well, they're pretty much me and my friend in 8th grade. You know what I'm saying, Aspen? Do you know what I'm saying? You better know what I'm saying. You know, this joke wouldn't make much sense if you didn't know what I was saying, Aspen. And so if you don't know what I'm saying, then you're a motherfricker. Next up, we have the 5th and 6th seasons, which focus more on Mordecai's romance with Margaret. I'm actually not a very big fan of these seasons, because I don't care about Margaret as a character, and honestly, I just don't like romance very much. I do enjoy the episodes that don't have to do with romance, however, those episodes are few and far in between. Lastly is the 7th and 8th seasons, which are more story and continuity focused like the 5th and 6th seasons. However, these seasons are a lot less romantic and have a lot more adventure and character development. I do enjoy this era for the show more than seasons 5 and 6, since unlike those seasons, it manages to be both story-centered and also feel a lot like the early seasons of Regular Show. I'm not sure whether or not I like these seasons more than the first 4, however I do find them very enjoyable. So I do find at least the first and final thirds of the show to be very enjoyable. However, the show as a whole does have a problem that is very similar to that of Dan Versus, in that I can tell it's trying to appeal to adults, however, it's stuck with the limitations of a kids show. Like with Dan Versus, I can tell that the adult cartoon inside of it is trying to break free, but it just can't because it's a Cartoon Network show. I'm sure not everyone will agree with me here, but I think Regular Show would have been better if it was an adult cartoon. At the very least, it seems like Close Enough will be filling that void, which is nice. Plus, this problem doesn't take away that much from the show's enjoyability. The comedy. The comedy in this show is actually pretty varied. There are dialogue-based jokes, there are surreal jokes, there are adult jokes. This show can be funny to pretty much anyone, which I guess is why so many people enjoy this show. No real complaints on the comedy side of things. The animation. Although the art style of this show isn't my favorite of all time, it is pretty nice to look at. Some of the backgrounds can be very detailed, the characters' movements are decent, and it's aesthetically nice to look at. However, just don't expect it to blow your mind or anything like that. So that was Regular Show, and although it's not perfect, I still love this show, and I always have. The characters, voice acting, stories, animation, and especially comedy are all very enjoyable. However, if you don't care for romance, then you can skip seasons 5 and 6. I am very excited to see Close Enough, and whatever else the creators of this show do in the future. You know who else is excited for Close Enough? my mom. Whoa!